As the pricier sections of Los Angeles burn to a cinder, the people actually responsible for this debacle and their political allies are outrageously pointing the finger at climate change in a desperate effort to avoid accountability for their own delusions, greed, political pandering, and overall ineptitude. Spoiler: Los Angeles is not burning to the ground because of climate change, but because of the stupid humans that Los Angeles selects to rule them. Let's talk about it. I am, of course, attorney Andrew Branca for Law of Self-Defense, and for those of you who stay to the end, I'll share with you how you can get a free copy of our best-selling book, The Law of Self-Defense Principles, your handbook to being hard to convict if you're ever compelled to use force in defense of yourself, your family, or your property. Now, before I do anything else, I want to share a short bit of drone footage of the devastation already created by these recent fires. Just horrific. Every one of those was somebody's home. It's gone forever, and in many cases will be unable to be rebuilt because they were left uninsured against the fire. I'll circle back to that a bit later. I don't know if anybody serious or of adult temperament is buying the progressive propaganda that all of this devastation was an entirely unpreventable consequence of climate change, though Governor Gavin Newsom and his political allies are certainly pushing that line as hard as possible in an effort to avoid accountability for their own failures. My own take on the modern institution of climate change is nicely captured here. The notion of catastrophic anthropogenic climate change has always been a financial grift, political power grab, and cult religion. Elon Musk on X feels obliged to tip his hat to climate change generally, I guess inevitably, given his stake in Tesla, posting earlier today, exactly, climate change risk is real, just much slower than alarmists claim. The immense loss of homes in LA is primarily due to, 1, nonsensical overregulation that prevented creating fire breaks and doing brush clearing, and 2, bad governance at the state and local level that resulted in a shortage of water. Of course, everyone agrees that climate change is a real thing. The Earth's climate has been changing for 4.5 billion years and always will. My objection is to the notion that climate change presents a catastrophe to humans that can only be avoided by handing all our liberties and resources over to the kinds of people actually responsible for the catastrophe that is currently the Los Angeles fire. To the extent climate change presents any particular threat to humans generally, it is what might be called a slow-moving disaster, and humans excel at dealing with slow-moving disasters. Worse for climate change is that in their desperate effort to induce the panic necessary to get normal humans to give up their liberties and resources to a bunch of fascists, they have a near-perfect record of predicting imminent climate doom. And by perfect record, I mean they are invariably 100% wrong. I expect you can't read this, but this is a list of varied climate disaster predictions dating all the way back to the 1960s, and every single one of these has been proven to be wrong. Indeed, it would be easily possible to make a list of failed climate catastrophe predictions that was thousands of pages long because they are always wrong. Of course, Elon has no trouble identifying the real cause of the current disaster in Los Angeles as a response to a follow-up to his earlier post. Someone had written, "So what you're saying is Governor Gavin Newsom and LA Mayor Karen Bass failed the people of California." And Elon responds, "That much is obvious." That factors other than climate change are responsible for the current disaster is, of course, being recognized by many. Here's a X post I saw earlier today that reads, "Don't you just hate it when climate change hires a fire chief based on pronouns, gives away fire equipment to Ukraine, mismanages forests, tears down dams, refuses to fill existing water reservoirs, cancels fire insurance, and lays off firefighters for refusing an experimental vaccine?" And that largely echoes my own take on the matter. I wrote, "Homeless vagrants setting multiple fires as California fails to clear accumulated biofuels and allows all its water to run into the Pacific, while cutting the fire budget, sending its fire equipment to Ukraine, and driving the home fire insurance business out of the state does not equal climate change." But is there actual evidence to support my take? I'm glad you asked. There is, and I'd like to share it with you. First, the notion that these fires are some unpredictable consequence of climate change is utter nonsense. California catches on fire every single year and has for decades. I know we get the smoke here in Colorado. Indeed, here's a figure of California fires that almost precisely matches the current blazes, except this figure is from 2019, 5 years ago. Hardly anything could be more repetitive and predictable than these exact California fires. Importantly, the notion that these wildfires are ignited by climate change is patent nonsense. California officials have known and noted for years that the almost exclusive cause of the state's fires are not climate change, but humans. See this news article noting that fully 95% of California wildfires are caused by humans. The news reports of homeless vagrants causing catastrophically destructive fires are far too numerous to share comprehensively, so I'll just provide a couple of examples. Here's a 2017, 8 years ago, story of a homeless encampment fire burning down millions of dollars worth of homes in the high-end Bel Air neighborhood. Here's a 2021 story, 4 years ago, of one Ramon Santos Rodriguez, unquestionably a lifelong American citizen, setting a fire in the Pacific Palisades that burned down over 1,100 acres. And in the current fires, there have been persistent police reports of individuals and groups committing outright arson. In this 911 report, a woman is said to be setting a tumbleweed on fire. If you've never seen a tumbleweed in real life, it not only makes almost perfect kindling, more easily set on fire than even paper, it's conveniently carried along by the wind to spread its generous flames. And here's a contemporaneous 911 report of a group of 5 men committing arson in Los Angeles, sufficiently credible that LAPD sent out not only cruisers, but even helicopters to hunt them down. Is it even possible that some progressive fascists are deliberately setting fires as acts of political terrorism, as this meme would suggest, particularly as a false flag activity to advance their cult religion of climate change? Before you shake that notion off as ridiculous, let's not forget, it wasn't so long ago before progressive George Floyd protesters were deliberately burning down American cities for precisely the goal of inducing political change, the very definition of terrorism. I propose that these current fires, as well as almost all past fires and all future fires to be expected, are not being ignited by climate change. They are being ignited by people. Often the deranged, homeless, drug-addicted vagrants that are so plentiful in Los Angeles in particular. America can choose to have a civil and well-ordered society in which we forcibly institutionalize the violently deranged who burn our cities down and murder us on public transport, or we can continue to share our public spaces with precisely those violently deranged. We must choose one of those options. Of course, one cannot have fire without fuel. And again, the plentiful fuel necessary for these kind of massively destructive wildfires is not a consequence of climate change, but rather a consequence of more progressive ineptitude. It's well understood that wildfires can be mitigated by competent forest management. In fact, California has known this for many years. Indeed, no one claims to have known this more than California Governor Gavin Newsom himself. This 2021 4 years ago, News Report notes that on Newsom's first day in office, on January 8th, 2019, almost exactly 6 years ago today, Newsom declared war on wildfires. Newsom would go on later to claim that he'd overseen over 90,000 acres of fire mitigation activities in California's forests. The problem? It was overwhelmingly a lie. At best, a mere 11,000 acres of the fire mitigation had occurred. And why is fire mitigation important? Because effective fire mitigation removes the fuel necessary for a wildfire to rage out of control. It's important to understand that living trees make poor fuel for wildfires, and a wildfire being fueled by merely living trees is relatively easy to control. Those living trees are literally full of water and not particularly combustible. What fuels wildfire is dead organic material allowed to accumulate on the forest floors. After a year or two, dead trees and limbs and leaves become dried out and make for perfect fuel for wildfires. Remove those trees and limbs and leaves, and you remove the wildfire fuel. In fact, Donald Trump noted all this in a statement made in a previous California fire way back in 2018, fully 7 years ago, and he made this point while he was literally standing next to Gavin Newsom.
It's cleaned out and protected. You've got to take care of the floors, the floors of the forests, very important. You look at other countries where they do it differently, and it's a whole different story. I was with the president of Finland, and he said, we have a much different, we're a forest nation. He called it a forest nation. And they spend a lot of time on raking and cleaning and doing things, and they don't have any problem. And when it is, it's a very small problem. So I know everybody's looking at that, to that end, and it's going to work out.
Trump also spoke on this in his interview on the Joe Rogan podcast just this past October.
I could have water for all of that land, water for your forests. Your forests are dry as a bone.
Yeah.
Okay?
Dangerous.
That water could be routed. You could have everything. Oh, not only dangerous, billions of dollars a year they spend on forest fires. And, there's a case with the environment. They're not allowed to rake their forests because you're not allowed to touch it. When a tree falls down, after 18 months it becomes very dry. It's like, like real firewood. It's bad. A tree that's up, these are all things I learned the hard way, the easy way. But when a tree is up, it sucks water. It's wet. I went to they had a couple of horrible forest fires in California, and I said, you get a lot of trees standing. Yes, they were healthy trees, sir. I said, with this intense heat, that you could see they were charred a little bit on the bottom, but they were going to be all right because they're soaking wet because they suck up the water, right? But when they fall,
right,
they're like, it's like lighting a match.
Yeah.
And you got to be able to clean. They call it maintain your forest. So I was with the head of Austria. He said, it's a shame. I see all those forest fires in California, and all they have to do is clean their forest, meaning rake it up, get rid of the leaves, get rid of, leaves that are sitting there for 5 years. And
we'll certainly get rid of the dead fall.
And get rid of the trees that have fallen that, are like... so many things this country. By the way,
could you really
rake
the whole
done.
Forest, though? I don't think you could rake the whole forest.
Well, you could,
I think you can get rid of the deadfall, but raking all the leaves.
You could certainly get rid of the dead. Okay,
yeah, I think that's the real issue.
Environmentally, they don't want to do that. They don't. They said, it's got to be nature and all this stuff. But
so Trump was roundly mocked by progressives for suggesting that the forest be raked, as if this process would involve thousands of dads wearing flannel with hand rakes and plastic bags. In fact, forest raking, or more accurately, mulching, is common and is done with powerful industrial machines like this one. A notable benefit of what here is called forest mulching: reduced risk of wildfires. Combine this with removal of dead, fallen trees, and you've removed almost all the readily combustible fuel that a wildfire requires. Forest management teams across the world do this as a matter of routine. But Governor Gavin Newsom negligently refuses to take on such efforts in California, despite the people of California having voted for billions of dollars for wildfire mitigation efforts. Okay, well, if you're not going to stop deranged, violent humans from igniting the wealth of biofuels the government of California recklessly allows to accumulate in the state's forest, at least you could ensure that there's adequate water on hand to put out a wildfire once it starts, right? Wrong. In fact, California has for decades made utterly inadequate efforts to provide its ever-growing, at least until recently, population with adequate water supplies for even basic living purposes, much less for fighting fires. One clown I saw posting on X today noted that the LA Fire Department made use of an amazing quantity of 3 million gallons of water in fighting the current fires. So clearly, inadequate supplies of water could not have been the problem behind these fires' destructiveness. Well, the figure of 3 million gallons of water may sound like a lot, but it's really not in this context, especially not when one is trying to get ahead of a wildfire before it rages out of control. In fact, 3 million gallons of water is the same as required to fill just 5 Olympic-sized swimming pools. In fact, the same volume of water can be found in just 3 typical city water towers. And we know the 3 million was totally inadequate in this case because within hours of beginning to fight these current fires, the Los Angeles fire hydrants had run dry. So why doesn't California have adequate water on hand to fight wildfires that reliably occur every year and have for decades? Trump spoke to this issue as well in his October interview on the Joe Rogan podcast.
Water. You know, in Los Angeles, you can't get proper amounts of water.
Right.
And it's unbelievably expensive. And you might have a house in Beverly Hills, and they're actually thinking about rationing water. Can you believe it?
I can believe it.
I was in the farm court country with some of the congressmen. We're driving up a highway, and I say, how come all this land is so barren? It's farmland, and it looked terrible. It was just brown and bad. I said, but there's always that little corner that's so green and beautiful. They said, we have no water. I said, do you have a drought? No, we don't have a drought. I said, why don't you have no water? Because the water isn't allowed to flow down. It's got a natural flow from Canada all the way up north of water, more water than they could ever use. And in order to protect a tiny little fish, the water up north gets routed into the Pacific Ocean. Millions and millions of gallons of water gets poured.
It's actually worse than that. The magnitude of water that California allows to simply run off into the Pacific Ocean rather than be captured in reservoirs for all public uses, including fighting predictably reliable wildfires, is almost unimaginable. Remember the clown who argued that 3 million gallons of water is so much that surely no greater volume of water could have helped fight these fires? To put into context how little 3 million gallons of water really is, note this. The state of California allows literally billions of gallons of water to run into the Pacific Ocean every single year. That's billions with a B. And if you're thinking, well, that's California, but these fires are just around Los Angeles, the numbers don't get any better for that. Here's an image of stormwater running under the boardwalk at Laguna Beach in Los Angeles, straight into the Pacific Ocean. Looks like a lot of water, right? That's because it is a lot of water. In fact, if you can't read the text here, I'll read it for you. The greater Los Angeles area alone allows 437 million gallons of water to run off into the Pacific every year. You heard that right. Los Angeles ran out of water to fight these current fires after exhausting a mere 3 million gallons. Anybody think that maybe an additional 434 million gallons of water might have helped prevent the wildfire from getting out of control in the first place? So that firefighters weren't standing there impotent, holding flaccid hoses attached to dry hydrants? And why isn't any of this water captured, either statewide or in the Los Angeles locale? Is it because the people of California and Los Angeles are too stupid to recognize the need for this water? Nope. In fact, the people of California have voted for billions of dollars in reservoir and water retention efforts. Rather, it's the government of California, which has for years been led by Governor Gavin Newsom and which for many more years has been led by a supermajority progressive legislature that has simply failed in this fundamental responsibility to ensure adequate supplies of water to its residents. Now, there are surely other factors here as well driving California's incompetency in dealing with the wholly predictable wildfire risk faced by the state every year. Surely the financial grift that is the global warming industrial complex, allowing for billions to be diverted from the public wallet into private hands, doesn't help. A government that has somehow managed to fill multiple senior positions in both its fire department, water department, and forest management department with proud members of the LGBTQ community, despite this community supposedly being an oppressed minority requiring particular protection from the bigoted public, I think that's certainly of note. Are we prioritizing sexual preference over fundamental competence? Also not helpful has been the state's destruction of the home fire insurance industry, which has long recognized the increased financial exposure caused by California's inept management of wildfire risk, and sought to raise rates to maintain financial integrity in the face of these increased risks. When the state refused to allow the increased rates, the insurance companies were obliged to cancel policies and even exit the California fire insurance market entirely. Rather than fix this price-controlled debacle of its own making, the California legislature instead set up a state-run insurance scheme that is wholly inadequately funded to provide compensation for the losses already incurred in just the current fires. It's just dumb and dumber and dumber, catalyzed further by greed, ineptitude, and delusions of superiority. But in the interest of time, I'm going to wrap up today's show here. In closing, these destructive fires cannot credibly be laid at the door of the cult religion of climate change. They are clearly, incontestably, and contemptibly the responsibility of the human beings elected by the people of California to serve them. If only based on the factors I've covered in depth here, the human ignition by deranged vagrants of the wealth of biofuels allowed to accumulate, and the failure to provide anything like the water resources necessary to fight these perfectly predictable fires. Look soon for these same people to expect the rest of the United States to foot the economic bill for their own political inanity. Okay, folks, before I wrap up, I do want to share with you how you can get a free copy of our best-selling book, The Law of Self-Defense Principles, your handbook to being hard to convict if you're ever compelled to use force in defense of yourself, your family, or your property. We translate all the legalese into plain English so you can make better informed, more confident, more legally sound, and more decisive decisions in defense of what you value most. And perhaps best of all, most people tell us they can read the entire book in less than an afternoon. Check the book out on Amazon where it's 5-star rated, but don't buy it there. They'll charge you $25 for the book plus shipping and handling. Order the book from us, and we only ask that you cover the cost of shipping the book to you. The book itself is free. Grab your free copy of The Law of Self-Defense Principles right now at lawofselfdefense.com/free book. I'll close out by reminding all of you that if you carry a gun so you're hard to kill, that's why I carry a gun, so I'm hard to kill, so my family is hard to kill, then you also owe it to yourself and your family to know the law so you're hard to convict. I remain attorney Andrew Branca at lawofselfdefense.com, and unusually I'm closing this show out by once again playing that tragic drone footage I shared at the start. Stay safe.